Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with everyone you know. It's a great episode that I got lined up for you. I am spotlighting the patriot poet today, someone who has a remarkable story to tell. Imagine a young girl, no more than 7 years old, torn from her home across the vast ocean, and brought to the shores of a land that would soon be in the midst of a revolution, battling for their independence, torn from her African homeland. And this is the story of Phyllis. She is going to soon arrive in Boston, a city where the tensions are boiling over. You have colonists and the British at each other's throats, and unfortunately for Phyllis, she was destined for a life of slavery. It's just the way it was at the time. And Phyllis, she wasn't born with that name. It was given to her by a Boston merchant who purchased her in 1761. He named her after his ship that would carry her here to the colonies. Now think about that. Your name is part of your identity, but she no longer has an identity. She was not a newcomer. She was a piece of property. Despite that, though, she was destined for greatness, and she would ultimately be purchased by the Wheatley family. Now, within the Wheatley household, something extraordinary would begin to unfold. Amidst the daily routine of servitude, you had Susanna Wheatley, who saw a spark in Phyllis. She saw something special. Susanna was compassionate, and at a time that slaves didn't receive an education, Susanna decided that she's not going to go by the conventional thought of the day. She began to provide Phyllis with the very education that would come to shape Phyllis's life, that would come to shape her role in the patriot cause. And she taught Phyllis how to read and write, and this would ultimately unlock a new universe for Phyllis, where freedom of thought and expression is going to flourish. Not only did Phyllis meet the expectations of Susanna, she exceeded those expectations, and she delved into the classics. She mastered Latin, poetry, and would soon become a key figure in American literary history. Poetry flowed naturally from her, and she began to have a keen understanding of the world around her, particularly as the revolutionary sentiments are bubbling up. They're reaching a fever pitch. While the chains of enslavement bound her, her mind was unshackled. Her poems were steeped in classical allusions, a devotion to religion. Soon she would subtly weave the very ideals that were stirring in the colonies at the time, ideals of liberty and freedom, the idea of justice and self-determination. And I wonder what went through her mind. I think that's so important, because think of the irony. Here is an enslaved woman denied the very freedoms being so passionately debated throughout the colonies at the time, where themes of liberty and justice are being proclaimed. And let's face it, she was living proof that intellect is no longer bound by color or social standing. Word of her extraordinary talents started to spread outward. And this young black woman, defying all expectations, began to ripple through the intellectual circles of Boston. And it's a testament. It's a testament to the undeniable power of her mind. The Wheatleys ultimately would adopt her. They would give her her freedom. And in 1773, she published her first book, Poems on Various Subjects, Religion, and Morality. Ironically, it was published in London, England at the time, a country that we're going to be engaged in a revolution with. Now, as a book is being published, she actually traveled with the Wheatley family son, Nathaniel, to oversee the publication of her book. She went to London, and during her visit, she met with none other than Benjamin Franklin, who was in London serving as a colonial agent to see if we could come to some type of agreement with the British and avoid an all-out revolution. Now, you have to realize the magnitude of this meeting. Franklin was a printer, a scientist, an author, a statesman. Like, if you want to learn about one founding father, if you had to choose one, Benjamin Franklin certainly was one of the most interesting people, not just in American history, but in human history. He was a leading intellectual thinker, and he was no stranger to the idea of brilliance. So the fact that he would receive Phyllis speaks volumes as to her literary achievements and the regard he actually had for her. Now, according to the limited information we have, because we don't have a lot on what went down in this meeting, Franklin, he was always a curious mind. He always wanted to meet exceptional people, and he received her warmly. He read her works. He was impressed by them. Franklin saw something undeniable. And though they would never meet again, the encounter marked a quiet recognition. Two figures from vastly different worlds, joining together by the powers of ideas. The belief that liberty was not bound by the jurisdiction of race or class. It was the nourishment for the human soul. Even more interesting than her encounter with Benjamin Franklin is her encounter with another founding father. Now, you're listening to the America's Founding series, where we uncover the little-known people and stories that helped shape our great nation. And if you're enjoying the episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Leave the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating on any podcast platform that allows it, especially Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with others. Now, jumping back in, we're exploring the life of Phillis Wheatley and the impact she had on our founding. And I want to take a closer look, an examination between Phillis Wheatley and the founding fathers, but particularly George Washington. At this time, tensions continued to escalate between the colonists and the British. The drums of revolution are beating louder and louder, and Phillis Wheatley turned her poetic talents towards the man chosen to lead the Continental Army, George Washington, and she set out to write General Washington. Now, picture the scratch of a quill pen writing on a piece of parchment. Imagine the weight of her words as she crafted not just a tribute to General Washington, but a heartfelt plea rooted in the very principles the revolutionary cause now embodied. It was an appeal for the promise of what America could be.
Celestial choir, enthroned in realms of light, Columbia's scenes of glorious toils I write. While freedom's cause her anxious breast alarms, she flashes dreadful in refulgent arms. See Mother Earth her offspring's fate bemoan, and nations gaze at scenes before unknown. See the bright beams of heaven's revolving light involved in sorrows and the veil of night. Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side, thy every action let the goddess guide. A crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine, with gold unfading, Washington, be thine.
You want to talk about bold? A black person who was once a slave, writing a letter to the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, urging him to see the full potential of the colonies and recognize the inherent right of all people, regardless of their skin color, to fight for liberation and our nation's ultimate destiny. Now, again, you have to think about how extraordinary this is. And then we have to look at Washington. You know, George Washington, newly appointed commander-in-chief by the Continental Army. He is now leading an army that is short on gunpowder, short on rifles, short on supplies, and short on a certainty that we're actually going to win this thing. The fate of a rebellion against the world's most powerful empire hangs in the balance. Every moment is going to be consumed by strategy and supply lines, survival and instinct. Now, Washington could have dismissed this letter. No one would have blamed him. The revolution was bleeding. We were having a lot of problems. Who had time to read a letter of poetry? But he didn't toss it aside. He opened the letter. He read her poem, and something in her words stirred him. Here was a woman born in bondage, praising his leadership, invoking the language of liberty, urging him to embrace the full promise of the American Revolution for the cause of liberty and independence. Her words weren't flattery. They were conviction. And Washington saw that. He saw her. Now, rather than ignore her, he actually wrote her back.
I thank you most sincerely for your polite notice of me, in the elegant lines you enclosed, and however undeserving I may be of such encomium and panegyric, The style and manner exhibit a striking proof of your great poetical talents, in honor of which, and as a tribute justly due to you, I would have published the poem had I not been apprehensive that while I only meant to give the world this new instance of your genius, I might have incurred the imputation of vanity. This, and nothing else, determined me not to give it place in the public prints. If you should ever come to Cambridge or near headquarters, I shall be happy to see a person so favored by the Muses, and to whom nature has been so liberal and beneficent in her dispensations. I am, with great respect, your obedient humble servant, George Washington.
This wasn't just a polite thank you note. This was George Washington, the commander-in-chief of a ragtag army fighting for survival, acknowledging the humanity, the intellect, and the patriotism of a young black woman who had once been enslaved, a woman with no official title, no wealth, no power, only her words. But the most extraordinary thing was how he signed his letter back to her. Not with formality, not with indifference, but with humility and an invitation to meet. And he wrote her, "I am, with great respect, your obedient and humble servant." See, Washington didn't see a slave. He saw a patriot. He saw a poet, a kindred spirit in the fight for liberty. That signature line, it wasn't just a courtesy. It was recognition, an affirmation that the ideals of the revolution belonged to all who believed in them. And I believe that this actually marked the turning point in how Washington viewed black Americans. You know, prior to Wheatley's letter, Washington was a slave owner. He harbored reservations about arming black men to fight in the Continental Army. But something in Wheatley's poem would provide a spark that may serve as one of several factors when it comes to Washington's view of slavery. And they did end up meeting in March of 1776. Picture the scene. You have General George Washington, the embodiment of the revolutionary spirit, extending an invitation to an enslaved poet to visit him at his headquarters in Cambridge. Envision Phillis Wheatley, accompanied by one of the Wheatleys, stepping into the presence of this towering figure. George Washington was rather tall for this period of time. He stood at 6'2", and I think that the average person was about 5'8". Now, we don't know the exact words that were exchanged at this meeting. You know, did they speak of poetry, of the unfolding battles, of the contradictions between the fight for freedom and the perpetuation of slavery? We have no idea. We don't really know the details of their conversation. However, what we do know is that following this meeting, Washington's positions on slavery began to evolve. First, regarding free black men into serving in the American Revolution, and then by 1778, he approved plans for the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, an integrated army unit consisting of both whites and blacks. And the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, I'm going to have to do an episode strictly on the 1st Rhode Island Regiment because they earned a reputation for their ferociousness and their bravery. And in my opinion, this is a powerful testament to the impact of Wheatley's voice, because news of this remarkable poet and her conversations, her connection to General Washington, it began to spread. And it had a ripple effect that would start to challenge the ingrained biases that existed in the era, the prejudices of the era. Had she not written that poem, had she never met Washington, would he have changed his views on slavery? And we don't know. We can't answer that question. It would be speculation. But I do think that it certainly played a role. It certainly influenced him. A month later, you have Thomas Paine, the radical voice of the revolution. And he is someone that certainly knew how to use the pen. In any event, he read the powerful verses of Phillis Wheatley's poem to Washington. And Paine, a master of wielding words, someone that wanted to ignite the flames of rebellion, he recognized the inherent power in her articulation of freedom, especially coming from someone that was denied that very right. So in April of 1776, Paine, with a keen understanding of public sentiment, he actually published Wheatley's poem. Now, you picture the broadsheets being distributed, the words being read aloud in taverns and homes across the colonies. Here was someone that used to be enslaved, who was not just passively observing the revolution, but actively engaging in it, engaging with the core tenets, praising the leadership, invoking the sacred ideal of liberty. Unfortunately, Phillis Wheatley's life was cut short. She was extinguished far too soon at the age of just 31. But her voice, it didn't die with her. Imagine the impact of her collection of poems. It serves as a testament to her extraordinary talent and her unwavering spirit in the face of unimaginable hardship. She is one of America's first female voices for freedom and equality, and that would help shape our nation. Her words gave voice to a revolution that was struggling to define itself. She spoke of freedom not as a luxury for the privileged, but as a right for all. And through her pen, she held up a mirror to the founding fathers themselves, challenging them to live up to the ideals that they were proclaiming. She was not a bystander to history. She was a participant of it. And she reminds us all that our founding wasn't just forged on battlefields and in congressional debates. To understand America's founding, you have to look at the totality of the American experience, and too often we fail to do this. Too often it's got to be on the extremes. But the reality is that we have to look at the totality. We have to look at the triumphs and the contradictions, the ideals and the failures. We have to look at the good and the bad. And think about it this way. Phillis Wheatley, once enslaved, was armed with intellect and a pen. She engaged with the minds who forged a revolution. She was more than just a poet. She was a force for liberty, and her legacy remains one of the most profound in American history. It's said that the schools don't really teach about Phyllis. If you enjoyed the story of Phillis Wheatley, please leave the P.A.S. Report a 5-star rating on any podcast platform that allows it. Take 30 seconds to write a good review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with others. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, particularly of the America's Founding series. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back next week with more great episodes of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.